Hello, everyone, and welcome to another NHL Free Agency video from the crew over here at Ruby and Previous Sports. My name is Noah Dibler, and in this video today, we're going to get into the signing of Claude Giroux by the Ottawa Senators on a 3 year, $6.5 million AAV contract for a total of $19.5 million. But before I do get into the Claude Giroux signing by the Senators, real quick, just want to shout out all the Ruby and Previous social media. We're on Facebook at Arabian Preview Sports, Instagram at Arabian Preview, Twitter at Arabian Preview 1, Anchor, where our podcast is anchor.fm/Arabian Preview. We're on YouTube at Arabian Preview Sports and TikTok as well at Arabian Preview. So real quick, I'm going to get the Florida Panthers salary cap situation up here to kind of explain why they let Claude Giroux go. We see right here that the Panthers currently are minus $3 million in the hole for the salary cap. They're in salary cap hell, to put it lightly. They do not have first rounders the next 2 years. They do not have a third rounder this year and a second rounder next year. They had traded away a lot of picks to contend, and we saw this year. They had 122 points. They won the President's Trophy, but they got swept in the Lightning in the second round, which was pretty disappointing for them, especially when it's a big rival like that. It was disappointing how it ended for them, but their logic was they wanted to try and contend as much as they could. And if we look at the salary cap, like I said, they're in salary cap hell. Barkov is locked up, for the foreseeable future at a $10 million AAV, which is, I think, great for them. He also has a no movement clause. He's a fantastic player. He's incredible two-way player as well. He's great on the defensive side, and he was a remarkable scorer for them last year. But they have a lot of signings coming up. 2 more years for Reinhart, $6.5 million. They traded for him from the Sabres. Then he's a UFA. Jonathan Huberdeau is a UFA after this year, $5.9 million. And then he's going to get a contract. Then I don't think they're going to be able to re-sign him unless they, try to clear up some cap big time, because he's going to want, definitely around $10 million as well. I mean, he is going to want around what Barkov has. He's been there forever. He was drafted back in 2011 for him. He's been the leader on their team with Barkov for a very long time. So he's going to want a big pay rise. Either they're going to they're going to clear guys to free up some cap, or they're going to trade him, or they're just going to let him walk. So something has to be done to resolve the Jonathan Huberdeau issue, because that's a big problem for them. Hornqvist as well as the UFA. They have guys like Sam Bennett, Carter Verhaeghe on not great contracts, over $4 million for both of them for the next 3 years, which is definitely not very good for them, to say the least. I think those are both, pretty big contracts for the level of players they are. I think they're just, pretty decent third liners maybe, but, definitely not guys I would be paying $4.5 million for. I think that's pretty much second line money most of the time, unless you massively overpay. They also have younger guys. Anton Lundell is a big prospect for them. He's only 20 years old. He's still on his entry-level rookie contract. He's an RFA in 2 years. Other than that, Duclair, $3 million for the next 2 years, and the rest of them just kind of depth guys. But on the defense side, they have Ekblad for $7.5 million for the next 3 years. Montour, $3.5 million the next 2 years as well. Forsling, they don't really have, other than Ekblad, any major, defensive contracts. It's mainly on the forward side. Guys like Reinhart, Bennett, Verhaeghe, Hornqvist over $5 million as well. Love Hornqvist, former Penguin, but that's definitely a lot to be paying for him. And obviously, when you pay a guy $10 million for the next 6-7 years in Barkov, that'll go against your cap a bit as well. But the main problem, I think, for them by far, Sergei Bobrovsky, $10 million for the next 4 years. Don't get me wrong. I love Bobrovsky, as Keith Onright would call him. But, unfortunately for him, he's always really struggled in the playoffs. He's a phenomenal regular season goalie. But when you're paying a guy $10 million, for the foreseeable future, he's already been there about 3 years, I want to say. You want him to show up in the playoffs, and unfortunately, he has not. They are also paying over $5 million a year in dead cap to Keith Yandel for the next for this year, and then over $1 million for the next 2 years for him, and then $1 million in dead cap for Scott Darling. So almost $6.5 million in dead cap, and then $10 million to Bobrovsky. That definitely hurts their cap as well. So the reason to let Giroux go, they couldn't re-sign him. That was always a rental trade for them from the Flyers when they got Giroux to try and make the cup run. and unfortunately for them, it failed. Now, on the other side, for the Ottawa Senators, a team I really like what they've been doing recently. They just traded for Brinket last week. They traded, the 7th overall pick for him, and they're a very healthy team cap wise. 19.5 million left in cap for them, and they already have most of their big guys locked up. Brady Tkachuk, who is their captain, very solid power forward for them. Not quite as good as his brother Matthew, who's a superstar, but he's still only 22, and he's locked up for the foreseeable future at 8.2 million, a little over it, for the next, I believe it's 6 years. So that's a good contract for them. Like I said, they just signed Giroux, who's still only 34. So I mean, he still has some good years in him, and it's only a 3-year contract at 6.5 million. I think that's very manageable for them. He does have a no move clause as well. But like I said, they just traded for DeBrincat, who scored 41 goals last year, and they only gave up, the main thing they gave up was their number 7 overall pick, which the Senators have been drafting, near the top of the draft for multiple years in a row. So I think their logic was, okay, I think our prospect system is fine. We have a good farm system. We're not going to get anything more valuable at number 7, we think, than a 40 goal scorer who is still only 24 years old. So I thought that was a great trade for them. Batherson as well, 5 years at 4.975 million AAV. I think that's great for them because Batherson, when he was healthy last year, was almost point per game. Unfortunately, he had an injury. He only played 46 games, but he had 44 points in 46 games. He was phenomenal for them. Stützle is a big part of their rebuild. He was a number 3 overall pick in 2020. He's an RFA after next year. Luckily, they have lots of cap space to give him a solid contract. Formenton is a third liner for them. He's a pretty young guy as well, only 22. Norris, who's 23, he's an RFA as well. He scored 35 goals last year. He's going to get a pretty decent contract, I think. And Joseph, who they got in the Nick Paul trade. On the defensive side, they still have Shabbat locked up to $8 million for the next 6 years. Shabbat is an elite defenseman at his best, but, he struggled a bit last year. Mainly he was hurt, I believe. So, we'll see what happens with Thomas Shabbat. They also have Zaitsev, who's on a not great contract, $4.5 million for the next 2 years, but luckily it is only a 2-year contract. Definitely an overpay for a guy like Zaitsev. Eric Branstrom is a big guy for them. He has not quite lived up to his potential, I think. He's an RFA this year. He was a big part of that Mark Stone trade when they traded him to the Vegas Golden Knights. Big defensive prospect. Hasn't quite lived up to his potential. He played last year, and I think he only scored something like 7-8 points. But he's an offensive guy. He still has plenty of room to develop. I think he's going to get a good contract. Jake Sanderson, the young American defenseman, he's still on his rookie level contract for 2 more years. And then they have a bunch of UFAs in Hamonic, Zub, and Holden, which none of these guys would be massive losses if they really lost, to be honest. They're just, top 6 defensemen or depth guys. So, none of those will be major losses. I don't think they're going to overpay for any of those guys when their contracts are up in a year. They just traded Matt Murray to the Leafs, and they got a decent bit back. So they're going with Cam Talbot this year in net. Anton Forsberg should be the backup, although he was the starter for a good chunk this year, and he was actually pretty respectable. I think they're going to, lean on Talbot more this year since they specifically made a move to bring him in. But Forsberg does have a 3-year contract, whereas Talbot's probably only going to be there this year since he's 35 and is a UFA next summer. Shane Pinto's another young guy for them, a 2nd-round pick, and I believe 2019. He's still only 21 years old, so we'll see what happens with him. They are taking $1.5 million in dead cap for Matt Murray for the next years. They're also paying $3.5 million this year in buyouts, which, luckily for them is not a lot. But like I said, the Senators very healthy cap-wise. They had enough to give Claude Giroux a very respectable contract. And going to Giroux specifically, I think Giroux's always been a very good player. Never quite worked out for him in Philly. He did make the Cup Finals back in 2010 when they lost to the Chicago Blackhawks. But if we look at his career stats, 923 points in 1,018 games, plus 34, 294 goals. He had 65 points last year, 21 goals, 44 assists, minus 5, 5.9 puck shares. Very solid player. He always has been. He's never quite been, an absolute superstar, talking like guys like Crosby or McDavid level, but he's been a very good player for 15 years in the league. And if you look at his playoff stats as well, 73 points in 85 games, 25 goals, plus 4. Like I said, he did make that big run in 29-10 where he had 21 points in 23 games. He also had 17 points in 10 games in 2011, 2012. He's had some good playoff moments. Unfortunately, it's gone off the rails a bit for him in the past, but he did have 8 points in 10 games last year and a +2, even though the Panthers did go out in the second round to the Lightning, like I mentioned earlier. But long story short, I think Giroux is a very good player, and it's only a 3-year contract. It won't hinder them long term. And keep an eye on the Senators, man. I think if they can fix their goaltending and their defensive core, other than Shabbat, who only played 59 games last year, if they can fix the defensive side of their game, their forward core is very good. I think Stützle is going to be a future superstar in the league. Like I said, Bathurst's point per game last year. Norris scored 35 goals. Tkachuk is their captain. He's locked up long term. He's a promising player as well. You trade for DeBrincat, a former 40-goal scorer, and then you add in a veteran presence as well in Claude Giroux, and Shane Pinto is a prospect as well that I personally really like for them. Keep an eye on the Senators. The problem for them is the Atlantic Division is loaded. Like I said, the Florida Panthers, even though they're in cap hell, they're still going to be very good this year. You have the Lightning and the Maple Leafs, who are both very good teams, and the Bruins are in the mix as well. So the main thing for them, can they take steps in that really tough division? But I think in a few years, the Senators are going to be looking much better. Their rebuild has looked great. They've stacked up, both on the forward core, and they also have Jake Sanderson, a very solid defensive prospect. So keep an eye on the Senators the next few years, man. I think they're going to be very good very soon. But before we get off here, I just want to give a shout out to our social media once again. We're on Facebook at Review and Preview Sports, Instagram at Review and Preview, Twitter at Review Preview 1. We're on Anchor as well for our podcast, anchor.fm/Review and Preview, YouTube at Review and Preview Sports, and TikTok at Review and Preview. Senators forward core looks very good. We'll see what happens with the Florida Panthers cap situation as well. Mainly Huberdeau is a UFA next year, so we'll see what happens there. But for myself, Noah Diber, and all the crew at Review and Preview, this has been another NHL Free Agency video. We will be back very soon for more Free Agency content because the signings are absolutely going crazy the past few days. Until then, have a great day, and we'll see you.